My husband spit in my face in front of his mother and sister, and they clapped. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just walked away without a word. 5 minutes later, the entire house shook when I made one single call. The living room went silent. What happened next? They never saw it coming. Can you imagine a moment so utterly demeaning, so soul-crushingly humiliating, that it rips away every last shred of your reality? For me, it was the moment my husband spat in my face, and then, in chilling unison, his mother and sister applauded. It was over something stupid, you know? Dinner plans, or maybe their dry cleaning. But lately, everything I did was wrong. Too loud, too quiet, too me. He just walked up, no warning, and spat. Directly in my face. The sheer, unadulterated contempt. I stood there, frozen, the wetness on my cheek a searing brand. 12 years. 12 years of slow-burn cruelties, of being chipped away, and nothing prepared me for that. It wasn't anger. It was disgust. Like I was something beneath his shoe. Patricia, my mother-in-law, just glowed with satisfaction. Finally, she purred, someone put her in her place. My sister-in-law, Janet, chimed in, perfectly manicured nails tapping. Maybe now she'll learn to keep her mouth shut. My place? Oh, the irony. They had no idea what my place was. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't wipe his disgusting spit away. Instead, a slow, quiet smile spread across my face. It wasn't happy, it wasn't angry. It was the smile of a woman who just realized the game was finally, gloriously over. You're absolutely right, I said, my voice steady as a rock. Everyone should know their place. David looked utterly bewildered. This wasn't the Sarah he knew. The one who crumbled, who apologized, who desperately tried to fix things. That Sarah? She died the moment his saliva hit my skin. She was gone. I turned and walked to the kitchen, feeling their eyes burning into my back. I could hear their whispers, plotting their next cruel move. What they didn't know. I'd figured out the rules of their twisted game months ago. My hands, surprisingly, didn't shake as I pulled out my phone. I wasn't falling apart. I was calm. Calmer than I'd been in years. I found my brother's number. Michael, my attorney. He answered on the first ring. It's time, I told him, just like we'd planned. Are you sure? His voice was gentle, but all business. We'd had this conversation before. He spit in my face, Michael. In front of his mother and sister. They clapped. The silence on the other end was heavy, then his voice hardened. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't say anything else. Don't explain. Don't argue. Don't apologize. Just wait. I've been waiting for 3 months, I reminded him. I know, he said. And now, it's over. I stood in that kitchen, the place where I'd cooked thousands of meals for people who saw me as a servant, where I'd swallowed so much pride I'd forgotten what it tasted like. The house was dead quiet. No more sneering whispers, no more satisfied laughter. I walked back into the living room, and there they were, all three, standing pale and still in the hallway. Like they'd seen a ghost. Who did you call? David's bravado had evaporated. I just walked past them to the window. A black sedan was pulling into the driveway. Sarah, who did you call? Patricia's voice was sharp with real worry now. I turned to them. And for the first time in forever, I felt like me. The woman with opinions, boundaries, and the strength to actually enforce them. I called someone, I said, looking each of them dead in the eye, who knows exactly where everyone's place is. The doorbell rang. A deep, resonant sound that echoed like thunder. All three of them flinched. They looked at the door, then at me, then at each other. Uncertainty. Pure, raw uncertainty. The doorbell rang again, more insistently. Aren't you going to get that? I asked, pleasantly. It's your house, after all. David moved towards the door like a man walking to his own execution. He opened it, and Michael stepped inside, briefcase in hand. My brother, in his full, terrifying, divorce attorney glory. Good evening, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I'm Michael Peterson, and I represent Mrs. Sarah Peterson. I have some documents for your immediate attention. The change in the room was instant. Patricia, moments ago so smug, visibly shrank. Janet's face went white. And David, my husband, the man who'd spat on me, looked like he was about to be violently sick. "Documents," he croaked. Michael, with deliberate precision, opened his briefcase. "Divorce papers. A restraining order. And a few other items I think will be of particular interest." He handed David a thick stack, then turned to Patricia and Janet, giving them their own sets. "Ladies," he said, with a terrifying politeness, "you're also named in several of these proceedings." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the kitchen clock ticking from 3 rooms away. This was it. The moment I'd been working towards for 3 agonizing months. The moment I'd finally admitted to myself that my marriage wasn't just troubled, it was abusive. Not just emotionally, but systematically, deliberately. They had spent years breaking me down, making me question my worth, my sanity, my right to exist. But they didn't know that for those same 3 months, I'd been documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every manipulation, every time they'd isolated me. Conversations recorded. Texts saved. A case built so meticulously, I would never have to apologize for breathing again. Michael looked around the room, a satisfied glint in his eyes. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, turning to me, "shall we discuss your new living arrangements?" I just nodded, not trusting my voice yet. 3 months of secret planning, secret meetings, pretending to be the broken woman they thought they'd created. And it all culminated here. David was flipping frantically through the papers, his breathing growing faster, more panicked. Patricia clutched hers like they might vanish. Janet just stared, mouth agape like a fish out of water. "There must be some mistake," David stammered, his voice high and desperate. "Sarah wouldn't. She couldn't." "Oh, but she did," Michael replied smoothly. "Mrs. Peterson has been quite thorough. I think you'll find everything is very much in order." I looked at the 3 people who had made my life a living hell, who had convinced me I was worthless, who had celebrated my humiliation just minutes before. They looked so small now, so powerless. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel room. My hotel room. The first one in 12 years. The sheets were crisp, white, untouched by the weight of anyone else's expectations. For a fleeting second, before it all came flooding back, I felt peaceful. Then, the memories hit. David's ashen face, his hands trembling as he read through document after damaging document. Patricia shrinking in her chair. Janet, utterly silent, her usual cutting remarks dried up like a poisoned well. My phone buzzed with texts. I didn't even glance at them. I knew the drill. Apologies, explanations, promises it would all be different this time. The same hollow lies, just with a new desperate edge. Michael's instructions were clear. Don't respond. Let them sweat. Let them wonder exactly how much you know, how much evidence you have. And oh, did I have more than they could possibly imagine. It had all started 4 months ago with a phone call for David. A breathy, intimate woman's voice asked if Danny was coming over. Her husband was working late. When I said, "Wrong number," she laughed. "Oh, is this the wife? How embarrassing." That single line shattered the last of my illusions. Not because David was cheating, honestly, I think a part of me always knew. But because of her tone. Like I was a joke. Something to be dismissed. I hung up speechless. But something inside me clicked. For the first time in years, I felt it. Real, true, blazing anger. Not the quiet resentment I'd been suffocating with, but a clean, bright fury that sliced through all the self-doubt they'd woven around me. That night, while David slept beside me, probably dreaming of his affair, I made a decision. I was going to uncover everything. Every lie. Every manipulation. Every cruel calculation. And then I was going to use it all to take back my life. The investigation? Easier than I ever imagined. David was sloppy, so stupidly overconfident. He kept his phone unlocked. His computer password was our wedding anniversary, a detail that would have been sweet if he wasn't using it to coordinate his betrayals. What I found made me physically sick. Not just the affair, which was bad enough, but his texts with Patricia and Janet. Planning ways to make me more manageable. Jokes about my appearance, my intelligence, my worth. The casual, chilling cruelty of people who saw me as an inconvenience, not a human being. There were threads going back years, strategizing to isolate me from my friends. Patricia had actually mapped out a plan to make me financially dependent, to have David discourage me from working and then weaponize money. She's too independent, Patricia texted Janet. We need to make her understand that her comfort depends entirely on keeping us happy. Janet's response? Even worse. Don't worry, Mom. A few more years of this and she'll be so broken down she won't even remember who she used to be. Reading those words felt like dying and being reborn simultaneously. The part of me clinging to hope, making excuses, it died instantly. But something new, something unbreakable, took its place. A fierce determination to prove them wrong about everything. I called Michael that very night. My brother, always protective, but also respectful of my marriage, had always stayed out of it. When I laid it all out, the phone line went silent for so long I thought we'd disconnected. Sarah, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion, how long has this been going on? Years, I admitted, but I was too close to see it. I just kept thinking if I tried harder, became whatever they wanted, none of this is your fault, he cut in firmly. But we are going to make them face consequences. Michael connected me with a discreet private investigator. Within weeks, we had everything. The affair, with a married neighbor, Rebecca. The financial manipulation, Patricia had opened credit cards in my name. The systematic emotional abuse, so gradual I'd almost convinced myself it was normal. But the most damning evidence? That came from me. Michael had given me a small recording device. I didn't record every conversation, just the ones where I sensed their cruelty or heard them reveal their true selves. And those recordings? Devastating. Hours of them discussing me like a problem to be solved. Patricia coaching David on how to guilt-trip me about money. Janet's cackling laughter as she spread rumors to isolate me. The worst, though, was from just 2 weeks prior. I was making dinner and their voices from the living room caught my attention. A tone that made me hit record. She's getting suspicious, David was saying. Rebecca thinks she might know. Patricia, dismissive. What's she going to do? Leave? She has nowhere to go. We made sure of that. And Janet, chillingly, even if she found out, who'd believe her? We've spent years making sure everyone knows how unstable she is, how jealous and paranoid. They were planning to gaslight me, to discredit me, before I even discovered the affair. They were ready to make me question my own sanity. But they had underestimated me. Or rather, they'd underestimated the woman I used to be, before they tried to erase her. I was Sarah Peterson, sister to one of the state's most formidable divorce attorneys. I had a master's degree in psychology. I understood exactly what they were doing and how to document it. I had friends they didn't know about, resources they never bothered to investigate, and a strength they believed they'd completely destroyed. Most importantly, I had patience. For 3 months, I played the broken, submissive wife. I smiled. I apologized. I made their dinners. All while secretly recording their cruelty, documenting their crimes, building a case that would utterly obliterate them. The hardest part wasn't collecting evidence. It was pretending. Continuing to let them hurt me, to absorb every insult, every humiliation, biting my tongue when they treated me like garbage, all in service of this moment. My phone buzzed. Michael. How are you holding up? He asked. Better than I expected, I said, and I realized it was true. Lighter than I'd been in years. Good, he said, because they're already trying to retaliate. David called at 6 a.m., claiming you had a mental breakdown, demanding we return his stolen property. Apparently, my evidence is now theft. I actually laughed. Then Michael mentioned David was also claiming I was having an affair. Rich, right? Patricia's idea, I assume? I asked. Probably. She called 20 minutes later, suggesting we all sit down and work this out like reasonable adults. The delusion was breathtaking. Even with undeniable proof, they still couldn't grasp that their actions had consequences. What happens next? I asked. Next, he explained, they find out this isn't just about divorce. Patricia's financial fraud, those credit cards in your name, that's criminal. Their harassment campaign? Intentional infliction of emotional distress. And David's affair with Rebecca, whose husband is a prominent local businessman. That's going to have some very interesting social consequences. A pang of something like guilt tightened my stomach. Michael, I don't want to destroy them. I want them to leave me alone. Sarah, his voice was gentle but firm, they spent years trying to destroy you. Systematically. Deliberately. Cruelly. They celebrated your humiliation. They planned your emotional breakdown. They stole from you, lied about you, and turned your own marriage into a weapon against you. He was right. I knew he was right. But 12 years of conditioning doesn't just vanish overnight. The choice is yours, Michael continued. We can settle quietly. Generous terms for you, minimal consequences for them. Or we can let them face the full legal and social ramifications of their actions. But you need to decide before they realize how much trouble they're actually in. I looked out the hotel window at the city waking up. People heading to work, to normal lives. Lives where spouses didn't spit in each other's faces. Where mothers didn't plot against their sons' wives. I wanted that life. I wanted to be one of those people, walking purposefully, not running from something terrible. What would the quiet settlement look like? I asked. Generous divorce terms, he said. The house, most of the assets. And binding agreements for no contact. They avoid criminal charges, public embarrassment. You get your freedom and financial security. And the alternative? Full prosecution. Public exposure of the affair, the financial fraud, the systematic abuse. They could face jail time, bankruptcy, complete social destruction. I closed my eyes. 3 months ago, the thought of David in jail, Patricia facing charges, Janet's perfect reputation in ruins, it would have horrified me. But that was before I'd listened to hours of them laughing about my suffering. I need to hear one of the recordings again, I said suddenly. I need to remember exactly who they really are. Michael didn't argue. A few clicks and my phone buzzed. I pressed play, my voice asking if anyone wanted coffee. Then Patricia, she's so desperate to please, isn't she? Like a dog begging for scraps. Janet's cruel laughter, at least dogs are useful. David's cold, dismissive tone, sometimes I wonder what I ever saw in her. She's gotten so pathetic over the years. And Patricia, with a smirk in her voice, you saw a doormat. And that's exactly what we turned her into. I turned off the recording, sat in the silence. These were the people who'd pretended to love me, who'd stood at my wedding and promised to cherish me. The people who'd systematically destroyed my self-worth while making me grateful for the privilege. I called Michael back. My voice was steady, crystal clear. I want them to face the full consequences, I said. All of them. The war was just beginning. 3 days later, David showed up at my hotel. I saw him through the lobby doors, unshaven, disheveled, a wreck. The staff tried to stop him, but his voice echoed, demanding to see his wife. Former wife, I corrected silently. Sarah, please, he pleaded, his eyes red-rimmed. We need to talk. I just watched him over my coffee. 12 years. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not a flicker of love. Just a mild curiosity about what performance he had planned. He pulled up a chair, looking around the busy lobby for privacy. This has gotten out of hand, he started, using the same condescending tone he always used when I overreacted to Patricia's cruelty. I know we've had our problems. But divorce? Criminal charges? Sarah, this is insane. I took a sip. Which part seems insane to you, David? The part where you spit in my face? Or the part where you and your family spent years systematically destroying my self-worth while laughing about it behind my back? His face flushed. Those recordings. You can't use those. Recording people without their consent is illegal. I almost smiled. Patricia had clearly been doing her research. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent. I was present for every conversation. They're perfectly legal. The color drained from his face. You planned this. All of it. You've been planning to destroy me. No, David. I planned to save myself. There's a difference. He leaned forward, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the man I thought I'd loved. Before his mother convinced him that loving me was weakness. Sarah, I know I've made mistakes. We all have. But we're family. Families work through problems. Family? I repeated, the word tasting foreign. David, do you remember what your mother said when she found out I'd had a miscarriage 3 years ago? He flinched. Of course, he remembered. She said it was probably for the best, since I'd just raise another weakling anyway. And you, my husband, the father of that lost baby, just sat there and nodded. Mom was upset, he insisted. Your mother was cruel. And you enabled her, because it was easier than standing up for your wife. That's when I should have left. But I stayed, because I thought families work through problems. I thought if I just tried harder, loved you more, made myself smaller, eventually, you'd choose me. He was quiet, then softly, I did love you, Sarah. I still do. No, I said firmly. You loved having someone to blame. Someone to absorb your mother's poison. You loved having a scapegoat. That's not true. I pulled out my phone. Would you like me to play the recording from last month where you told your mother you sometimes wonder if you'd be happier if I just disappeared? Or maybe the one where Janet suggested you could get me committed if I became too much trouble. He went completely still. He knew I had it. I'd been in the bathroom, the recorder on the coffee table. Perfect audio. David, let me make something very clear. For 3 months, I documented everything. Every conversation, every text message, every email. I have recordings of your mother coaching you on how to gaslight me. I have evidence of the credit card she opened in my name. I have proof of your affair, hotel receipts, photos Rebecca sent you, everything I found on your phone. His hands were shaking now. Sarah, if this gets out, my job, my reputation, you should have thought of that, I cut in, before you humiliated me in front of your family. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean, did things I regret. Destroying my entire life won't fix anything. I looked at his face, searching for genuine remorse. All I saw was selfish panic. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done to me. He was sorry he was facing consequences. Your life isn't destroyed, David, I said. It's just finally being exposed for what it really is. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Rebecca's husband found out. He's filing for divorce, too. Might want to stay away from social media. I showed David the message. His face went ashen. Oh, God, he whispered. Paul knows. Paul Richardson was a prominent local businessman. A man who would not quietly tolerate being made a fool of. Did you really think you could carry on an affair for months in a town this size without consequences? David buried his face in his hands. This is going to destroy everything. My job? My standing? Your job at the accounting firm that handles Paul Richardson's business interests? I asked. Yes, I imagine that might become awkward. He looked up sharply. How did you? David, you were never as careful as you thought. And you certainly never paid attention to what I knew about your life. I stood, suddenly exhausted. You all made the mistake of assuming I was stupid just because I was kind. You confused silence with ignorance, submission with weakness. Sarah, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. I'll cut off contact with my mother and sister if that's what it takes. For a single beat, I wavered. This was what I'd wanted for years. For him to choose me. To put our marriage first. To acknowledge how wrong his family's treatment of me was. But it was too late. You can't cut off contact with your mother and sister, David, I said. Because in about 2 hours, they're both going to be arrested. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. His mouth opened and closed. Arrested, he finally managed. Patricia, for identity theft and credit fraud. That credit card she opened in my name? Felony fraud. Janet, for conspiracy and harassment. Turns out there are laws against coordinating campaigns to isolate and emotionally abuse family members. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Michael filed the charges yesterday. The police are serving warrants this morning. David sprang up, his chair crashing backward. Sarah, you can't do this. They're family. They're all the family I have left. They're criminals, David. And they are not my family. They never were. My mother is 72. You want to send a 72-year-old woman to jail. I want a 72-year-old woman to face consequences for her actions. Age doesn't excuse cruelty. And it certainly doesn't excuse fraud. He paced, running his hands through his hair. There has to be something. Some way to fix this. I'll pay back the money. I'll make them apologize. With what money? You're about to lose your job, remember? And apologies don't undo years of systematic abuse. My phone rang. Michael's name. Excuse me, I said to David, answering. Hi, Michael. It's done, he said. Both arrests went smoothly. Patricia tried to claim she was too fragile for handcuffs, but that didn't work. Janet demanded her lawyer, which is funny, since she's about to discover her lawyer has a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest? Paul Richardson used the same firm. They couldn't represent Janet against their primary client. I looked at David, who was watching me, desperate. Thank you, I told Michael. I'll call you later. I hung up. David was staring at me like I was a stranger. It's done, I said simply. Sarah, please. No, I cut him off, harder than I'd intended. No more pleasing. No more begging. No more making excuses for people who never showed me an ounce of genuine respect. I picked up my purse and walked towards the elevator. Where are you going? He called after me. To see my lawyer. We have a lot of paperwork to finalize. Sarah, wait. What about us? Our marriage? 12 years can't just disappear because of one mistake. I stopped, turned back to him. He stood in the middle of the hotel lobby, lost, broken, utterly bewildered by the collapse of the world he'd built on my suffering. One mistake, I said quietly. David, spitting in my face wasn't a mistake. It was the inevitable result of 12 years of treating me like I didn't matter. It was what you'd always wanted to do, and you finally worked up the courage to do it. That's not true. Yes, it is. And deep down, you know it. Just like you know your mother and sister are getting exactly what they deserve. Just like you know Paul Richardson has every right to destroy your career over what you did to his marriage. I turned back to the elevator, then paused. You want to know the truth, David? The real truth about our marriage? I stopped loving you 2 years ago. The night you laughed when your mother called me pathetic. The night you agreed with her that I was lucky anyone would have me. I died a little that night, and I've been dying a little more every day since. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. But I'm not dying anymore, I said, as the doors began to close. For the first time in years, I'm finally alive. As the elevator carried me away, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long, freedom. The last thing I saw was David, standing alone in the lobby, surrounded by strangers, finally understanding what it felt like to be abandoned by the people who were supposed to love him. It was a lesson he should have learned a long, long time ago. 2 weeks after Patricia and Janet's arrests, I was sorting through the few belongings I'd retrieved from the house. My new apartment was small, nothing fancy, but it was mine. And that made it beautiful. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw her. Rebecca Martinez. David's affair partner. Younger than I'd expected, polished, well off. My first instinct was not to answer. What could she possibly want? But curiosity gnawed. Mrs. Peterson? Her voice was hesitant, softer than I'd imagined. I'm Rebecca Martinez. I think we need to talk. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. She fidgeted with her purse. I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to, but there are things about David, about all of this, that you don't know. Things I think you deserve to hear. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She took in my sparse apartment, her eyes guilty. She probably realized that while she was playing house with my husband, I was being displaced. I brought you something, she said, pulling a manila envelope from her purse. Photos, text messages, evidence that might help your case. I took it, but didn't open it. Why help me? You're the one who destroyed my marriage. Her face crumpled. No, I'm not. That's what I came to tell you. I didn't destroy your marriage, Mrs. Peterson. David did. And he destroyed mine, too. She sank onto my couch, suddenly looking so much older. I need to start from the beginning. Because what you think happened between David and me, it's not the whole truth. I remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. 6 months ago, Paul and I were having marital problems. David was our neighbor. He seemed so understanding, so sympathetic. He told me his marriage was over. That you two were just staying together for appearances. A familiar surge of anger. Even in his affair, David was still rewriting our history, making himself the victim. He said you'd grown apart, barely spoke. that you'd both agreed the marriage was dead, but neither wanted the hassle of divorce. He even showed me text messages, Rebecca continued, conversations he claimed were between you two, agreeing to see other people discreetly. He forged them, I said immediately. Rebecca nodded. I think so. I never questioned them at the time. They fit everything else he was telling me. He was so detailed, so matter-of-fact. She pulled out her phone. But last week, after Paul confronted me, I looked at those messages again. I never actually saw them on your phone. David always showed them to me on his, claiming he'd screenshotted them. She showed me a series of texts supposedly from me. This isn't my number, I exclaimed. Look at the phone number. That's not even my number. I know. I figured that out when I tried to look up the number online. It doesn't exist. David created fake conversations to convince me you were okay with the affair. The sheer calculation. Breathtaking. He hadn't just cheated, he'd constructed an elaborate lie to manipulate her. There's more, Rebecca said quietly. Remember that weekend trip to your sister's about 3 months ago? I nodded. I'd gone to Karen's in Baltimore, needing space. David told me you were actually at a hotel with someone named Marcus. He said you'd finally started seeing someone, too, and were probably going to ask for a divorce soon. My blood ran cold. Marcus was my sister's husband. I was visiting my sister and her family. I know that now, she said, her voice cracking. But David showed me hotel receipts with your name on them, credit card statements for romantic restaurants. He made it seem like you were having this passionate affair while he was stuck at home alone. Those were forged too. Because now I know you weren't having an affair at all. You were just trying to survive what he and his family were doing to you. Mrs. Peterson, I need you to understand, I'm not a homewrecker. I would never have gotten involved with a married man if I thought he was lying. When David told me his marriage was over, that you were seeing someone else, I thought we were all adults, handling a difficult situation maturely. I sat down, the full scope of David's manipulations hitting me. How did you find out the truth? After Paul confronted me, I questioned everything. I hired my own investigator, not to investigate you, but David. To find out how much of what he told me was real. She pushed the manila envelope towards me. It's all in there. Evidence that David has been running similar cons on other women for years. Before me, there was Amanda. Before Amanda, Jennifer. Always married women with problems. Women he could convince were okay with the arrangement. I opened the envelope, my hands shaking. Photographs. Emails. A detailed investigative report. David is a serial cheater, Mrs. Peterson. More than that, he's a serial manipulator. He targets vulnerable women, tells them elaborate lies, convinces them they're doing nothing wrong. The first photo showed David with a woman I didn't recognize, looking intimate. That's Amanda Carroll, Rebecca explained. Married to a businessman who travels. David convinced her that you knew about their relationship and approved of it. When her husband found out and threatened to expose everything, David simply vanished from her life and moved on to the next target. How many women? My investigator found evidence of at least 5 serious affairs over the past 8 years. Probably more casual ones. 8 years. I thought I'd been in a troubled marriage for a few years. The truth? I'd been married to a stranger. A predator. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? Rebecca paused. Because David destroyed my marriage too. Paul's divorcing me. Everyone in our social circle knows. My reputation is ruined. My children are ashamed. I'm going to lose half of everything. She wiped her eyes. But the worst part isn't the social or financial cost. It's knowing I helped him hurt you. That I was part of the system he used to justify treating you like garbage. I looked at more photos. David, always relaxed, happy, a way I rarely saw him at home. There's something else, Rebecca said quietly. About his mother and sister. My stomach dropped. What about them? They knew about all of it. My investigator found texts between David and Patricia where she's coaching him on how to manage multiple relationships. She was helping him track his lies. The room seemed to spin. Patricia knew? About all the affairs? She encouraged them? Messages where she told David that having other women would keep me in line because I'd be too insecure to make demands. I thought of her subtle comments about my appearance, my desirability, designed to make me grateful David stayed. And Janet? She helped him create fake social media profiles. She invented the story about me having an affair with Marcus. The systematic nature of their conspiracy was overwhelming. They weren't just cruel, they were actively working to destroy my sanity and self-worth while enabling David's betrayals. This wasn't random cruelty, Rebecca's voice broke. It was deliberate, calculated psychological warfare. I set down the photos, trembling. They planned all of it. The isolation, the gaslighting, the affairs. They turned my marriage into a weapon against me. Yes, and they've been doing it for years. Probably to every woman David has ever been with. My investigator thinks Patricia might have had similar arrangements with David's father before he died. Hints in old family letters, a pattern going back decades. Generational. The thought made me sick. Patricia orchestrating psychological torture against other women in her family. What are you going to do now? I asked. I'm going to testify in your divorce proceedings. I'm going to provide whatever evidence I have. And then I'm going to try to rebuild my life, earn my children's forgiveness. She stood. I know you have no reason to forgive me, Mrs. Peterson. I know I was part of something that nearly destroyed you, even if I didn't understand it at the time. But David never deserved you. What his family did, it's criminal. Not just legally, but morally. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by evidence of a systematic betrayal far beyond anything I'd imagined. Not just an affair, but years of them. Years of manipulation. The man I'd married didn't exist. He'd been an elaborate fiction. But as devastating as that realization was, it was also liberating. Nothing that happened to me was my fault. I hadn't failed as a wife. I was the victim of psychological warfare. And now, I had the proof. When I called Michael, my voice was steady. I have new evidence, I told him. Evidence that's going to change everything. What kind? The kind that ensures David never gets the chance to do this to anyone else. It's time to stop being a victim. It's time for justice. Not just for me, but for all the women he's destroyed. The war was about to become a crusade. The conference room at Michael's firm buzzed with electricity. 3 weeks after Rebecca's visit, we'd assembled what felt like a war council. Michael, 2 associates, Rebecca and her lawyer, Amanda Carroll, David's previous victim, who flew in from Denver, and Jennifer Walsh, the woman before Amanda, who drove from Philadelphia. I looked around the table at these women. Strangers, yet we shared an experience I understood all too well. Each of them meticulously selected, manipulated, discarded by my husband. Each convinced they were in some ethical arrangement, only to discover they were pawns in David's sick game. Ladies, Michael began, spreading a massive timeline chart across the table. This isn't just evidence of adultery. This is a systematic pattern of fraud, manipulation, and psychological abuse spanning nearly a decade. Amanda, poised and professional, leaned forward. I had no idea there were others, she said quietly. David made me feel like I was the only one who truly understood him outside his marriage. That's exactly what he told me. Jennifer added, her artist's hands trembling slightly as she pointed to her part of the timeline. He said his marriage was basically over, just going through the motions until you could afford to divorce. Rebecca nodded grimly. Same story, word for word. I studied the timeline, seeing my own marriage laid bare, intertwined with David's betrayals. The pattern was horrifyingly clear. Same script, same tactics, same calculated lies. Here's what makes this so insidious, Michael continued, pointing to specific dates. David wasn't just cheating. He was using each affair to justify escalating abuse at home. He showed us transcripts of my recordings. Every new relationship, the psychological abuse against me intensified. It's like having an affair gave him permission to treat his wife even worse. Because it did, I said, understanding washing over me. He felt justified. If these other women found him charming, desirable, then I must be the problem. Michael's associate, Lisa Chin, pulled out more documents. But it gets even worse. Patricia and Janet weren't just enabling David's affairs. They were actively recruiting his victims. The room fell silent. Recruiting? Amanda asked. Lisa projected a screenshot onto the wall, a private Facebook group called Marriage Support Network. Patricia created this 3 years ago, Lisa explained. On the surface, it appears to be a support group for women having marital difficulties. But look at the member list. She clicked through profiles. Jennifer, you were a member in 2019. Amanda, you joined in 2020. Rebecca, you were added in 2022. I felt sick. They were hunting vulnerable women online. It gets worse, Michael said. We've analyzed the group's activity logs. Patricia and Janet would identify women who posted about marital problems, particularly women whose husbands traveled frequently or who seemed isolated from their families. They'd befriend them, offer support, and gradually introduce the idea that sometimes marriages need flexibility to survive. They'd share stories about couples who'd found happiness through discreet arrangements. Jennifer's face was pale. Patricia messaged me privately after I posted about feeling lonely while my husband was traveling. She was so understanding, so supportive. She told me about a friend of hers who'd found companionship with a married man whose wife was okay with the arrangement. She told me the same thing, Amanda whispered. Made it sound so mature, so civilized. Rebecca was staring at the screen in horror. They were grooming us. Like predators groom children. Exactly what they were doing, Michael confirmed. And once they'd identified a potential target, they'd arrange for David to accidentally meet her at the grocery store, at community events. Always in situations that seemed completely natural. I thought about all the times Patricia had insisted on accompanying me to social events. All the women she'd chatted with while I stood silently by her side. Women I'd thought she was just being friendly to. How many women? I asked, afraid of the answer. Lisa consulted her notes. We've identified 12 women who were members of the support group and had subsequent contact with David. Of those, 5 definitely had affairs with him. We're still investigating the others. 12 women. 12 marriages. Potentially destroyed by my husband and his family's systematic manipulation. There's something else, Michael said grimly. We've found evidence that Patricia has been running similar schemes for years, possibly decades. Before the Facebook group, she used church groups, community organizations, even PTA meetings to identify and target vulnerable women. He pulled out a box of old letters and documents. These belonged to David's father. After he died, Patricia kept all his papers hidden among his business documents. We found correspondence that suggests he was also involved in extramarital affairs, all following the same pattern. I picked up one of the letters dated 23 years ago. It was from a woman named Carol, thanking Patricia for her understanding and support during a difficult time in her marriage, and expressing gratitude for Patricia's introduction to a wonderful man who helped her remember what it felt like to be appreciated. My God, I breathed. This is generational. Patricia learned this from watching her own husband. And then she taught it to David. It's a family business, Rebecca said bitterly. Destroying marriages and manipulating women is literally the family business. Amanda stood up abruptly and walked to the window. Do you know what the worst part is? I actually liked her. Patricia, I mean. After David introduced us, she would call me sometimes just to chat. She'd tell me how happy she was that David had found someone who understood him, how grateful she was that I was bringing joy back into his life. She told me the same thing, Jennifer said. Made me feel like I was doing something noble, helping a good man survive a difficult marriage. I remembered Patricia's knowing smiles, the way she'd sometimes pat my hand sympathetically. After David had been particularly cruel, she was getting satisfaction from both sides. She enjoyed watching David hurt me, and she enjoyed befriending the women he was using to justify that hurt. Michael nodded grimly. Patricia Peterson is a psychological predator. She feeds on the destruction of other women's lives and relationships, and she's been doing it for decades. What can we do about it? Rebecca asked. I mean, legally. Can we stop her from doing this to other women? We're building a case for criminal conspiracy and fraud, Lisa explained. The fake social media profiles, the forged documents, the systematic targeting of vulnerable women, it all adds up to a pattern of criminal behavior. But more than that, Michael added, we're going to make sure everyone knows what they've been doing. Every woman in that support group, every community organization Patricia has been involved with, every church and social club. They're all going to learn exactly what kind of predators they've been harboring. I looked around the table at these women who'd been victimized by my husband and his family. Despite everything they'd been through, they were here, willing to fight back, willing to expose the truth, even though it meant reliving their own pain and humiliation. There's something I need to tell all of you, I said. Something I'd been thinking about since we started uncovering all of this. The room grew quiet. I spent 12 years making excuses for David's behavior. I told myself he was just going through a difficult phase, that his mother's influence was temporary, that if I just loved him enough, everything would get better. I paused, gathering my courage. But the truth is, I knew something was wrong long before I caught him cheating. I knew the way he and his family treated me wasn't normal. I just chose to ignore it because it was easier than facing the reality that my marriage was built on manipulation and abuse. Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That doesn't make any of this your fault. I know that now, but I need you all to understand something. David didn't become a predator because of his mother's influence or because of some childhood trauma or because he fell into bad patterns over time. He's a predator because he chooses to be one. Every lie he told, every woman he manipulated, every cruel thing he said to me, those were conscious choices. What are you saying? Amanda asked. I'm saying we need to stop giving him excuses. We need to stop treating this like it's some kind of tragic misunderstanding or psychological illness. David Peterson is a calculating predator who systematically destroys women's lives for his own entertainment, and he needs to face consequences that match the severity of his crimes. Michael smiled proudly. That's exactly the approach we're taking. David, Patricia, and Janet are going to face both criminal and civil consequences, but more than that, we're going to make sure their methods are exposed so completely that no other woman will ever fall for their manipulations again. Rebecca looked around the table with determination in her eyes. What do you need from us? Everything, Michael said. Every text message, every email, every conversation you remember, every lie they told you, every manipulation they used. We're going to document it all and present it to the world. As the meeting broke up, I found myself standing with the 3 women who'd been my husband's other victims. We were strangers brought together by betrayal and manipulation. But looking at them, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt sisterhood, real, honest connection with people who understood exactly what I'd survived. Thank you, I said to each of them, for coming forward, for being willing to fight back, for helping me realize I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or any of the other things they tried to convince me I was. Thank you for having the courage to start this, Amanda replied. For refusing to let them get away with it. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the network of lies and manipulation that had controlled my life for so many years. David, Patricia, and Janet had built their whole world on the systematic destruction of other people's happiness. They'd turned cruelty into an art form and manipulation into a family tradition. But now their victims were fighting back. And we weren't fighting alone. We were fighting together, armed with the truth and determined to make sure no other woman would suffer what we'd suffered. The predators had finally met their match, and we were just getting started. 6 months after that night, when David spat in my face, I stood in the courthouse watching him being led away in handcuffs. The judge had just sentenced him to 18 months in prison for conspiracy to commit identity theft, fraud, and systematic harassment. Patricia had received 2 years. Janet got 15 months. But more satisfying than the prison sentences was watching their entire world crumble in the months leading up to this day. The local newspaper had run a series of articles about the marriage manipulation network, as they dubbed it. Every detail of their systematic predation had been exposed. The fake support group, the decades of targeting vulnerable women, the psychological warfare they'd conducted against their victims. All of it was now public knowledge. David had lost his job within days of the story breaking. Paul Richardson had made sure of that. Janet's employer, a family counseling center, had terminated her immediately for conduct incompatible with our mission of supporting healthy relationships. But the social consequences, devastating as they were, paled in comparison to the civil judgments. Rebecca, Amanda, Jennifer, and I had filed a joint lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy, and fraud. The settlement had been substantial enough to ensure that none of us would ever have to worry about financial security again. More importantly, it had funded something I'd never imagined I'd be part of creating. Sarah. Michael appeared beside me as the courthouse emptied. The reporter from Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up interview. Are you up for it? I nodded. Over the past few months, I'd become something I'd never expected, an advocate. A voice for women who'd been systematically manipulated and abused by people who were supposed to love them. The interview took place on the courthouse steps with a reporter asking questions I'd answered dozens of times by now. But I never got tired of telling the story because each time I told it, another woman somewhere recognized her own experience and realized she wasn't alone. Mrs. Peterson, the reporter asked, what would you say to women who might be experiencing similar manipulation in their own relationships? I looked directly into the camera, thinking about all the women who might be watching, women who were living the life I'd escaped from. I'd tell them that love shouldn't make you smaller, I said. Real love doesn't require you to apologize for existing or to accept cruelty disguised as honesty or to make yourself invisible to keep the peace. If the people in your life are systematically destroying your self-worth, that's not love. That's abuse. After the interview, I drove to my new house. Not an apartment anymore, but a real house with a garden and windows that let in actual sunlight. It was smaller than the house I'd shared with David, but it was entirely mine, chosen by me, decorated according to my tastes for the first time in 12 years. Rebecca was waiting on my front porch with a bottle of champagne and a folder full of papers. It's official, she said, holding up the documents. The Peterson Awareness Foundation is now a registered nonprofit organization. We decided to formalize our advocacy work, creating a foundation that would help other women recognize and escape from systematic manipulation. Rebecca had used her settlement money to fund it, and Amanda and Jennifer had both committed to serving on the board of directors. How many women have contacted us this week? I asked as we settled in my living room. 7, Rebecca said, consulting her notes. 3 of them are situations we think might require immediate intervention. And we got a call from a prosecutor in Ohio who thinks she's identified a similar network operating in Cincinnati. It turned out that the Peterson family's methods weren't unique. Across the country, there were other predators using similar tactics to systematically destroy women's lives. Our foundation was helping to identify and expose them, one case at a time. My phone rang and I saw Amanda's name on the screen. Sarah, turn on channel 12 right now, she said without preamble. You need to see this. I grabbed the remote and switched channels. The evening news was showing footage of a woman being arrested outside what looked like a community center. The reporter was explaining that she'd been running a support group that was actually a front for targeting vulnerable women for manipulation and exploitation. That's exactly what Patricia was doing, Rebecca breathed. Same tactics, same predatory behavior. And she probably learned it from Patricia, I replied. Or someone like her. These techniques get passed around, shared among predators like some kind of twisted knowledge base. The news story continued, explaining that the arrest had come about after several women had recognized the patterns described in recent media coverage of the Peterson case and contacted authorities. We're making a difference, I said. And for the first time in months, I felt genuine pride in what we'd accomplished. Later that evening, after Rebecca had gone home, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, watching the sunset. It had been exactly 1 year since I'd first discovered David's affair. 1 year since I'd begun the process of reclaiming my life. The woman I'd been then, frightened, broken, convinced that her worth depended on other people's approval, felt like a stranger to me now. I'd thought that woman was weak, that she'd somehow deserved the treatment she'd received. But I understood now that she'd been strong in ways I'd never appreciated. She'd survived years of systematic psychological torture and still retained enough sense of self to recognize when something was wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Saw the news about the Ohio arrest. We're really doing this, aren't we? We're actually changing things. I typed back, we're just getting started. And it was true. The Peterson Awareness Foundation was already working with law enforcement agencies in 6 states, helping them identify and prosecute similar networks. We created educational materials for counselors, social workers, and clergy to help them recognize the signs of systematic manipulation. We'd established a confidential hotline for women who thought they might be victims. Most importantly, we'd refused to be ashamed of what had happened to us. Instead of hiding our experiences, we'd turned them into weapons against the people who'd tried to destroy us. A year ago, I'd been a woman whose husband spit in her face while his family applauded. Tonight, I was a woman who'd brought down a network of predators and was working to ensure that no other woman would suffer what I'd suffered. The transformation still amazed me sometimes. My neighbor, Mrs. Chin, waved from her garden next door. She was an elderly woman who'd become something of a friend over the past few months, often stopping by with homemade soup or just to chat. "How did the court proceedings go today?" she called over. "Justice was served," I replied. "Finally." She nodded approvingly. "Good. That family got exactly what they deserved." It was a sentiment I'd heard from dozens of people over the past few months. Far from being ostracized for exposing David's crimes, I'd found myself embraced by a community that was horrified by what the Peterson family had been doing in their midst. The women from Patricia's church had reached out to apologize for not recognizing what was happening. Several of David's former colleagues had contacted me to share their own suspicions about his behavior that they'd never felt comfortable voicing before. Even Paul Richardson, Rebecca's ex-husband, had contributed a substantial donation to our foundation, saying he wanted to help prevent other men from being victimized by these schemes. Because that was another thing we'd learned. David's affairs hadn't just destroyed the lives of his female victims. They'd also devastated the husbands of those women, men who'd lost their marriages and often their children because of the Peterson family's manipulations. As darkness fell, I went inside and made myself dinner, a simple meal, but one I'd chosen and prepared exactly the way I liked it. Such a small thing. But for years, I'd cooked only what David and his family preferred, adjusting my taste to accommodate theirs until I'd almost forgotten what I actually enjoyed eating. Now I knew I liked spicy food, exotic flavors, dishes that Patricia would have dismissed as too ethnic or too complicated. I liked trying new recipes, experimenting with ingredients I'd never been allowed to use in my old kitchen. I liked being myself fully and unapologetically. After dinner, I opened my laptop and began working on my book, The Marriage Trap: How to Recognize and Escape Systematic Manipulation. It would be published next year, with all proceeds going to the foundation. My editor thought it could reach hundreds of thousands of women who needed to hear this message. The first chapter began with the night David spit in my face, but the rest of the book was about so much more than that moment of ultimate humiliation. It was about the years of subtle conditioning that had led to that moment, the systematic erosion of my self-worth, the careful isolation from friends and family, the gradual rewriting of reality that had made me question my own perceptions. Most importantly, it was about the process of fighting back, the months of secret preparation, the careful documentation of abuse, the building of a support network, the legal battle, and finally the creation of something positive from the wreckage of my marriage. As I wrote, I thought about all the women who would read these words. Women who were living in situations similar to what I'd escaped from. Women who'd been convinced they were crazy, oversensitive, or impossible to please. Women who'd lost themselves so completely they weren't sure who they were anymore. I wanted them to know what I'd learned. That they weren't crazy, that their perceptions were accurate, that they deserved better. I wanted them to understand that love shouldn't hurt, that family shouldn't be a weapon, that they had the right to exist without apologizing for taking up space. And I wanted them to know that if they were ready to fight back, they wouldn't be fighting alone. At midnight, I closed the laptop and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, a conference call with our board about expanding our services. But tonight, I was just Sarah Peterson, a woman who'd reclaimed her life from people who tried to steal it. A woman who'd turned her pain into purpose, her victimization into victory. As I turned off the lights and settled into my own bed, in my own house, I thought about that night, 6 months ago, when I'd walked away from David's saliva on my face. I'd had no idea then what I was walking toward. I was walking toward freedom, toward purpose, toward a life where I mattered, where my voice was heard, where my existence was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. I was walking toward myself. And I'd never been happier to arrive.